Get started. We're going analog tonight, no microphones, so I'm also going to project. Good evening. Thanks for coming to Greenlight School. Really excited to host tonight's event. I'm Peter Mann, in from San Francisco. He will be talking with Max Linsky, so you're in for an excellent program. Before I turn things over, just a few housekeeping things. Please turn off or silence your cell phones if you haven't already. We'd appreciate if you keep your masks on the whole time that you're in the store this evening. And signed books are for sale behind the register. Peter freshly signed all of them. If you'd like them to personalize, you can do so after the event. And we're also recording this event, so it'll be on our YouTube channel forever.
All your questions were recorded.
Our interviewer for this evening is Max Linsky. Max is the co-founder of Pineapple Street Studios, the podcast company behind Missing Richard Simmons, Still Processing, Wind of Change, September 12th, 9/12, the Catch and Kill podcast with Ronan Farrow, and several more #1 hits. He is also the creator and host of 70 Over 70, and he co-hosts the Longform podcast. He will be speaking with our featured author, Peter Mann. Peter has a PhD in modern European history, is a past recipient of the Writing Fellowship, and teaches history and literature at Stanford and the University of San Francisco. He is also a graphic artist and creator of the online comic strip, The Quixote Syndrome. Tonight's featured book, The Torqued Man, is his first novel. At once a teasing literary thriller and a darkly comic blend of history and invention, The Torqued Man is propelled by two very different but equally mesmerizing voices. Louisa Hall described it as a rollicking spy novel full of Nabokovian tricks, which was basically why I booked the event. So you're in for something very special. Peter will read from the book, then Max will join him in conversation. Peter might read a little bit, and then you'll all have your chance to ask some questions at the end of the night. Please give a round of applause to Peter and Max.
Thanks so much, Jane. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me here. Thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to see such familiar faces and an unfamiliar locale. Thanks, Max, for giving me the once over. So I'm going to read for you just a little bit this book for those of you who haven't cracked it yet. It's Dueling Manuscripts, two voices. I'm going to read for you from the first voice we get from Adrian de Groot, who is a kind of low-level German Abwehr agent, kind of functionary of German intelligence organization. And then at the end, I'll give you a sample of the other voice by Finn McCool, who is our Irish spy on ice in Berlin. So I'll just give you a bit from the first chapter. This is in the form of a journal, November 30th, 1943. No, I'm not right there. That's first page kind of throw away. I first met Pike in the Burgos prison in 1940. Despite the bleak setting, I felt almost giddy, as I just spent a week in the company of Himmler, and would sooner have chosen to become an inmate there than suffer one more minute of that dullard. I still shudder when I recall that trip. I had been assigned to be the Reichsführer's interpreter on his tour of Spain, a demotion that was part of the security office's attempt to flex its muscles over the Abwehr. I knew I was in for a miserable week as soon as Himmler boarded the train in San Sebastian. He immediately began complaining that the nitrate deficiencies of the Iberian soil had thrown off his digestion and were interfering with the rhythm of his bowel movements. As if that weren't enough, his wife had neglected to pack his bee pollen supplements, no doubt a malicious act, thereby dooming him to 8 days of throat constriction and adenoidal hell. To my horror, this harangue, directed at everyone in his retinue, and to which we were obliged to listen attentively and fill the pauses with a natürlich or wie interessant, did not end when we pulled into Atocha, but continued for days, through the galleries of the Prado, where the Reichsführer insisted on seeing only the German and Dutch old masters, and admired them without breaking stride. He lectured us on the wonders of the neti pot, the earliest Aryan form of medicine, a nasal irrigation system for the warrior caste that led directly to the conquest of the decadent Hittites. It was all to be found in a proper study of the Sanskrit documents. Only when we came to Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights did our group pause, as the phalangists and SS men all marveled at the ingenious tortures of the right panel, cooing like women ogling dresses in a window display. The next day, the mayor of Madrid staged a bullfight exclusively for the Reichsfuhrer. A poor showing, the corrida hadn't yet recovered from the long siege during the war. The bulls were sluggish, the matadors timid. The regime had to bribe or coerce several hundred civilians to fill the stands and, to ingratiate themselves further with their Nazi guests, had chosen only the blondest, most Aryan representatives of Madrid. Serrano Suñer, who, as Franco's brother-in-law and lickspittle-in-chief, had been tasked with showing Himmler around the country, presented the Reichsfuhrer with some fragments of mixing bowl from an archaeological site in Segovia. Said Himmler, examining the shards. Could be a neti pot. You see, Reichsfuhrer, said Serrano Suñer, we Spaniards are descended from the Visigoths. There is good Aryan blood running through our veins, like yours. Himmler scoffed. No Aryan, he said, would make such a grotesque sport out of maiming innocent animals. I hated seeing Spain papered over in swastikas. I state this with absolute sincerity, even while I admit my sympathies had once been with the Nationals. I didn't want to see Spain go red, the churches torn down, the women renouncing dresses and dancing for overalls and agitprop, the vineyards collectivized and turned into Stalinist beet farms. In my naivete, I had believed a conservative stand against the excesses of materialism would preserve the soul, and with it art, which is always, in its authentic form, an expression of the soul. But those of us with a true preservationist impulse against the onslaught should have known we had no party to speak for us. I soon learned that Franco's regime, in its obsession with limpieza social and terror of foreign infection, was really only a rebirth of the Inquisition. Perhaps my idea of Spain, the one I saw threatened by the left, had never existed in the first place and was merely a postcard fantasy from my student days in Salamanca. But with Franco's victory, it had become clear to me that the caudillo and his phalanges were of the same stunted, loathsome issue as the thugs of our own regime. By the time we reached Barcelona, I was about to tear my hair out. I had been buried in a deluge of utterances about poultry rearing, Aryan pottery, and nasal hygiene. Stuck in my brain like a shard of glass was the phrase, Rudi, deine Hände bitte. This was how Himmler beckoned his monsieur, who traveled by his side at all times and was constantly realigning the Reichsfuhrer's chakras. On the evening of the pilgrimage to Montserrat, I seriously considered feigning illness. Himmler, through his study of bogus scholarship and his own lunatic theories, had concluded that the Holy Grail was hidden in the library of the mountaintop monastery, and was dead set on finding it. I was lying in my bed at the Ritz, bracing for a day of temper tantrums and trying to will myself into contracting a fever, when a message came for me. It was from the legend himself, Canaris. Only rarely did I receive a direct communique from the head of the Abwehr, and it was like receiving a lightning bolt straight from Zeus. Canaris was flexing his own muscles now, letting Himmler know he'd have to make do with another interpreter, because his agent would be busy doing actual espionage. I was so happy, I ordered a bottle of cava and drank it in the bath. I left the next morning for Burgos. My instructions were to recruit an Irishman currently serving a life sentence in San Pedro de Pardenia, but it felt like I was the one who had been freed from prison.
It's very fun to hear you read that. I've spent so much time with the book and hear it in your voice. I listened to the audiobook too.
Nice.
And I feel like you should have the audiobook.
Oh, that's good. John Lee is masterful.
All right, I feel like the honorable thing to do here is to ask you all of these deep textual questions about the novel that you have written, but I'm not going to do that to start because I feel like we've all had this experience where it's maybe less common now because of the internet and social media, where a friend of yours from high school or from college does something crazy, and you're like, I can't believe that guy did that crazy thing. And you have that experience, and it's strange. Pete and I know each other pretty well, and the way that I found out about this book was a email addressed to Dear Editor / Podcaster. It was a form press release, not even a custom press release. It was just a mass press release email alerting me to the fact that my friend Pete had written a novel, and would I like to have him on my podcast? I mean, once I got over my sort of insult, I found myself wondering, the fuck? You wrote a novel? And I was so blown away by the fact that you had done it, but also I was very confused about how I didn't know that you had done such a thing. Like it was a surreal experience, the email address to Dear Editor Podcaster.
No, I had my publicist send that directly to you as editor.
Just to keep me on my toes.
Yeah.
What did you do? All right, so I have some, we have not talked about this, and I have some genuine questions about it. Like, here are some. The whole time I've known you, were you trying to write a novel and you didn't tell me? Is that a real thing?
The whole time? No, not the whole time. The whole time I had enough fear and insecurity and kind of a lack of maturity, like in college, that the idea of writing novels seemed like a preposterous endeavor.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even think of attempting it when we first knew each other.
Okay.
But I harbored the vague desire, the vague ambition. So much so I think that I intentionally steered clear of like any creative writing classes in college, just because it might give it away, or like might be forced to confront my like lack of ability at the time to write a novel.
As someone who took those classes, there was no ability across the board.
It's been scrolled away in my brain as kind of like an open secret. Like I couldn't admit to myself, like since I was a kid, I think.
Yeah.
Like just as a voracious reader. I think I mistakenly, although it seems like be working out in its own weird, circuitous fashion. It's like I was like, I really would love to write a novel today. I know I'll go to graduate school in history, and that will somehow take me along that road.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
And no one will know.
And no one will know.
I don't even tell my friends. For example, I'll just send them emails to the Editor Podcast.
I think, what was I going to be like, hey man, I'm working on a novel, just thought I'd let you know. Nothing published yet, but man, I'm cracking away.
Yes! That is like literally what people say. I mean, that is a thing that...
Max, you're a busy guy. I just wanted to put this on your plate.
We've seen each other while you were working on the book. Like, that is just for like the record, that is like what friends do. Is they're like, I'm doing a thing, I'm working on a thing. But anyway, we...
For the record, we're airing this.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure that I told you I was working on a novel, not this novel, like a long time ago. But I, kind of threw it in there. Like, working on some projects,
it's like,
do you want
another beer? I'm working on a novel. All right, I'll see you in a little bit.
No, you said, you're like, I remember you said to me, you're like, oh man, you're like, you should get that up immediately. No, you said, give me some advice.
Don't talk to me about this shit.
No, I think you said, oh man, you're really out there alone on an island doing that kind of thing.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like,
dark thing to say.
Truer things have never been said.
Very much understand why you didn't bring it up again. Wow, I take back this whole line of questioning.
But I mean, I don't think I'm making it up. Because I remember thinking like, yeah, that's true. That's good. That's a good way of putting it.
Was it at that bachelor party? Because then I like,
Was that a funeral service? But it's true, like, you would be forgiven, even if that like 20-second exchange. It's not something I aired really to anyone. I just didn't want to, I didn't want to jinx it. I wrote a novel like I saw to completion. Basically when I went to graduate school, got a PhD in history, and like knew the one true thing I knew after writing a dissertation was I never wanted to write another work of scholarship again. And so I kind of made a promise to myself that I would work on a piece of sustained fiction. I was like, oh, I can write a long project. Like, that part was I like that aspect of it. So why don't I do like something I care about? Wrote a novel, nothing came of it, but except that I was like, oh, I want to do more of that.
Also historical fiction.
Also historical fiction, yeah, but unrelated.
And were you like working on this idea for a long time? Were you looking for ideas in your academic work?
Kinda. I had this weird abiding interest in the Spanish Civil War, like long before I could articulate why. I still can't give you a good reason why, other than like all of the ideological polarities that define our own time are there.
Yeah.
And Spain is this place I'm attracted to, and I've studied the language and been there a lot. And so I was so like weirdly into Spanish Civil War, like I wrote my stupid college admissions essay on imagining like being in the Spanish Civil War. It's gotta be the corniest piece of writing ever. Yeah, it was like me and George Orwell, or hanging out in the trenches.
It's amazing they would send you right to the creative writing class.
And so anyways, I was like, I don't think I like had an idea for a scholarly project, but I've been reading some stuff about it, and that's when I read about the guy that this book is loosely based on.
Yeah.
It's a real historical figure named Frank Ryan, who's an Irish Republican who went over to Spain to fight fascists and ended up getting captured by Italians and thrown in Franco's prison to languish there until 1940, early in the war. He lo and behold, who shows up with the Germans say, hey, we'll let you out of this prison for life if you come and work for us, because we're hoping to invade Britain, and it wouldn't be nice to have the IRA helping out on that side of things. And I was just like, oh, it sounds like so bizarre. It's hitting all these kind of nodes of interest for me, and so I didn't think like right away like that's my novel, but I kind of like popped into that idea somewhere in my brain, and it just kind of kept coming up, and I don't know what changed, but I think once I was working on this other thing totally unrelated, so then once I saw that through, somehow that kind of like announced itself front and center in my brain. It's like, hey, this guy's faced with like really terrible choices. Like, what'd someone like that do? Like, especially I think when that idea kind of announced itself, Trump had just been elected, and so this idea of being deeply complicit and kind of fantasizing about resistance in the world, like suddenly the world of like how does someone find themselves like not only in his position but like his spy handler, how does someone find themselves like working for this machine of death on the wrong side of things that even they didn't want to be on from the start. It all kind of made more sense to me.
I finished the book on Sunday, but hadn't read it for most of last week, and then Row happened on Friday, which felt like another moment, like November 2016 to me. And it made me think reading the book, like, did you learn something writing this about living in these times and the way you want to be in these times?
Man, that's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for it. I don't know. I don't think it didn't clarify anything for me in terms of like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Like,
another way of asking that question is like, do you see yourself
yeah, definitely. But I feel like if I had to choose, like, whose predicament strikes me as more my own, it feels more like Adrian's in terms of feeling, ideologically repulsed and yet like more complicit and impotent until, but maybe we don't have to feel that way. Or Finn in the sense of like, well, I guess I feel like both in the sense of like feeling that and then feeling like fantasies of action and some sort of like path forward. Like, well, this is unacceptable. So, but the idea of like some direct action that's going to like change everything is so quixotic and fanciful, which I find seductive, but also seems like there's kind of absurd element to it.
Totally. And there's also like, my experience is that the more that these things stack, the more fanciful that idea feels.
Yeah.
And it felt very present when reading the thing that they were trying to navigate some similar situation, which I guess I'm really on you, but I feel quite helpless to navigate.
Yeah.
But it's helpful that you didn't learn anything. That's what I'm hearing. No sort of like insights or pros at all.
No. I think I found that like being on the writing end of fiction is as kind of elusive and unforthcoming with like call to action or like here's what you should take away, here's what you should do, as being a reader of fiction, right? Like it's, I think it's true of all, but to me like fiction that's meant to hit them gives you the sense of like, and here's how we solve it. Like that doesn't then work as art for me usually. Like that's what's great about nonfiction, right? It's like really lay out the problem, really like dissect that, and then show me here's where we go. And I think working on work fiction, whether you're on the reading end or the writing end, just doesn't give you a clear answer. Like generates more questions, lets you kind of articulate the ambiguity, but will never resolve itself into a program.
Does it make the ambiguity more comfortable?
Yeah, I feel like maybe all too comfortable though, you know, because that's kind of dangerous. Because like, oh man, I could like drill deep in this ambiguity forever. That's not really to lead into anything else. But yeah, that's like my mantra too. Like teaching is it's just like yeah, what we're doing here is like we're building our tolerance for ambiguity. Like we're learning how to be in a world that's ambiguous and that makes us feel ambivalent, that doesn't want to give you clear answers. And I think that's worthwhile. But how that feeling of rich ambiguity yields to like changing something that's tangibly wrong as, you know, post-Trumpian order or Nazi Germany, yeah, let's go figure.
That's on somebody else.
Yeah.
Are there other ways that your academic work and teaching talk to this work? Again, like you have to just experience my aside from barely this conversation we had, like getting that press release. Like I was just like my friend who writes comics and is a professor has written a novel, and I try to square those things. How does that work talk to this?
Yeah, I think my teaching comes out of that same sense of where I come from this as a writer, which is as a reader and lover of fiction, and that's kind of how I approach teaching. I like to kind of teach across disciplines. I don't have to be too pigeonholed, and so just like sink into the world of the text and its ambiguity, right, and its tensions, and then the historical context outside of that. It's all the same stuff that drew me to try my hand at this. And it's also like it allowed me like writing it to kind of show my like the constellation of books that have formed me.
How much research are you doing the thing?
How much research?
Like no. Like, I mean.
Yeah, I'm Wikipedia neti pod. I did like some research up front before I started writing a word, just to kind of dig more into like things I didn't know anything about, like the obverb, like how was the obverb structured?
Yeah.
You know, like things that were never in my wheelhouse of historical interest before. Like I studied stuff like the 19th, 20th century literature. It's kind of like the history of literature and thought. So in terms of like what shaped someone like Adrian as a translator, I think I got that down. Like I got like his his intellectual formation in the cultural world. But there are all these things that it's really fun to be like, okay, I have to like put this person on the ground, right, in 1940, figure out like what does that shit look like? How does it work? What do they wear? So that kind of stuff I could do some groundwork, and then you can kind of, as you figure out what's needed, you can kind of fit in like, oh, maybe
But it's as you're going. You're like,
yeah,
I'm going to dive back into this world over here now. Otherwise, I can't quite square this next section.
There's definitely some of that. There's a little bit of like just work that I had done that I had no idea what it was for. For example, I read this really great book on it's called Blitz, Drugs in the Third Reich, about how Nazi Germany was just rife with pharmaceutical drugs. Like they were awash. And amphetamines, and I think the Nazis invented such evils as decaf coffee. They were just experimenting with, taking things out of food, putting things in food. They had this amphetamine called Pervitin that everyone was taking, and this book chronicles just like how ubiquitous it was, and how like everyone from like Hermann Goering was like, dragging around like a suitcase full of Pervitin wherever he went, to like every soldier was like issued like Pervitin, like stay away for days fighting. Like that's how they did the Blitzkrieg. They like got to France like high out of their minds. And this book also featured extensive work on stuff that wasn't like really new research that he did, but he did a great job of telling you about Hitler's personal physician, this guy Theodor Morell.
Yeah.
So I read this book just kind of recently, like in the days before I started writing this, like with no agenda. I was like, that was wild.
Yeah.
And it was just rallying around my brain, and all of a sudden it kind of presented itself like not only as like atmosphere, but like kind of plot point. Like yeah.
And to what extent like is that planned? I mean, I just have like some nerdy writing questions for you, but like how how organized is that? Like, did you know you were going there? Did you have some crazy outline? Were you like, I got that like whole drug thing, I'm gonna put it in over here? Like, how, to what extent did you know where you were going, and to what extent is this just like, come?
It's a little bit of both. Like I tried it like as much as I could because like boy, like nothing takes away anxiety like knowing exactly where you're going, right? Oh, phew! Like I'm not just like writing like what the hell is happening here? Like what's gonna happen on the next page? And yet I feel like if I try to plan it too much, then it just feels like homework a little bit. It doesn't feel alive to me.
Is academic writing always good?
Yeah, I was good at it.
You were good at academic writing?
I mean, no, not like as a real scholar, but like in school.
Am I good at my job? No, I'm not.
No, I consider like my academic side is like strictly teaching. I wrote a couple articles and like had no desire to do more in that fashion. I could see myself writing in a non-fictional vein history, but like I just don't have any interest in adding another brick to the edifice of scholarship. It's not. I find that like journalists, people featured on Longform, I encountered there, like people like David Graham, like they're writing narratives of history that crack open, like a moment in time, to crack open like the personalities, the structural forces at work. I think, and there's like great people, don't get me wrong, there are truly great historical scholars too, but I just feel like the kinds of questions that academic fields kind of force people to ask in this kind of direction of specialization, I think it leads us away to asking the most interesting questions about truly interesting subjects and people.
Because you have to find such a narrow, like, niche.
I think it's, because it has to answer a question beyond itself in some ways. Like, so what does this subject tell us about, like, say, how this larger force, right? What does this tell us about, say, the structural forces at work in Nazi Germany? In terms of how much power they have, right? Or what does this tell us about, like, the role of kind of cultural forces or cultural discourse? Like,
you can't sit in the ambiguity that way.
Yeah, there's something about that I just it doesn't work for me. I did too much of it, like on the school side of things, it always feels like school. And so what I love about this is I feel like I'm like out of school, and I just felt like uncaged in this really like delightful place. Like, oh wait, like I can write a story that I can try to be funny. Yeah. I can be filthy.
Yeah, there's so much peak filthiness. It's like some real like Argus comics in here.
Oh dear. That one out.
I have other nerdy writing questions.
Yeah.
The structure, the idea of alternating between these two voices and using the journals, like, is that there at the beginning? Do you arrive at that later? How does that work creatively? Like, it's this whole thing. I guess the other question about that is like my experience of it. I mean, this might just be that like I'm a dummy, but it took me a second to totally like piece together what was going, and maybe all we're talking about is just like my discomfort with ambiguity and your comfort. But is that the idea? Is that sort of like the structure of the book? That one.
Yeah, how did I land on that? So one of the things I did research-wise, like where it was, I think either before I'd written anything or really early stages, it was, it must have been before anything, is I read, there's a couple biographies of Frank Ryan. So I read those, and that led me to some of the archival documents they drew on in UK archives. They had the actual interrogation reports of the real-life counterpart to Adrian de Groot, the spy handler. So they arrested him, interrogated him after the war, and it was all about, they wanted to like get from him like what was the hell was going on with Irish operations? What were you guys up to with Ireland? Like nothing really happened, but like we sure arrested a bunch of Germans in Ireland. So what was that all about? Yeah. And so part of trying to piece that together is just like interrogating these like low-level functionaries. And so they were like, this guy was the spy handler of Frank Reich. The real guy's name was,
Did you go to the UK?
It was all digitized. I would have loved to have had
It's
it.
on the internet.
Yeah, on the old internet. Yeah, so I went to the UK and logged into a library kiosk. And,
That's my romantic.
No, sometimes that's what's great. But this was just available to me on my fingertips. And so I was able to read the interrogation reports, basically piecing together Frank Ryan's life told through his German spy handler, and that kind of lit something up for me. I was like, oh, that's what's interesting about a way to tell this guy's story, is not him telling his own story or a kind of disembodied third-person narrator, but from the embedded perspective of his spy handler. And so as soon as I thought that, I thought, well, whatever his spy handler thinks he's up to, wouldn't it be great to have, you know, an overlapping but quite divergent narrative in terms of how someone like, and my character's called Frank Pike, right, an Irishman in Berlin who is completely anti-Nazi and yet finds himself like waiting to do the Nazi bidding. Like, how does he make sense of his life there? How does he make sense of the fact that he's just like rotting in Berlin during the war? And so I thought, well, there's some element, no matter what, of a kind of, right, quixotic, delusional, like the fantasies we tell ourselves about what we're doing in the world. And so I thought if I could amplify that, and that's where kind of the idea of like channeling this kind of mock heroic Irish myth, a larger than life version would be how he would tell his tale.
Right.
And so we never actually quite know, right, what there's no objective truth. And I think that's like part of, we have to kind of, we the reader have to piece that together. So like, how do we evaluate the evidence of both of these manuscripts to get at some kind of truth? And that's, I guess part of that comes out of, you know, historical training, or just like the idea of that's how you write history, is you look at deeply, you know, piecemeal, biased bits of evidence and try to put together some story between them.
And in this case, you're just, the idea is that the reader is.
I hope so. Yeah.
for the ambiguity, that's what you're going for. But what about the choice to have them in a relationship? Where does that come into the process?
That took me by surprise, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't calculate that. I didn't know that Adrian was gay when I set out writing the story. Like, his character, it wasn't something I knew right off the bat. But then, one of my models for him was German writer Thomas Mann. One of the guys I wrote my dissertation about, so I knew like an inordinate amount of information about Thomas Mann. Yeah. It's like he's making a home in my brain, for better or for worse.
Something pretty like large slice of pie.
Yeah. So that was something. Mann himself was a closeted homosexual, you know, kind of knew his own sexual orientation, but never like publicly admitted it, and kind of played with it and hinted at it through his fiction. And so I thought, like, what would someone like Thomas Mann's kind of disposition, like, finds himself, not unthinkable, like, finds himself kind of like with a little less talent and direction, and then he's like becomes kind of hack work translator, interpreter, work for the government.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what kind of drew me in. And then Frank Pike as Finn McCool, his alter ego, he kind of right off the bat, like, it made sense that, well, this guy is like larger than life in every respect. It makes sense that he's pansexual, because he's pan everything, right? And he's a man of prodigious appetites. And so then it made sense to me then that the two of them in this fraught relationship, like, it makes sense that it's bound to happen.
What else are you gonna do?
What is it? Yeah, we passed a lot of time together.
The idea that it surprised you. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? Like,
yeah. As though like I'm channeling, like as though I'm like communing with my characters who are speaking to me.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the process. Like, it's so informed by all of this history, and yet there are parts of it that don't reveal themselves to you until, I assume, you're like sitting there typing on a keyboard.
Yeah.
I don't exactly know what the question is. Like, does that, like, channeling, to use your word, like, is that something that has come naturally as you have started to do this work? Is that a thing that you can get better at? Is that like a thing you can hone? Is that just like, am I asking you, like, what is art?
How does you write a book? I'm trying to find out how you do another one. It's fucking unclear. And so I don't really believe in the channeling, like, just like, you know, show up at the desk and like let my characters speak to me. It's like, no, I'm inventing these people. I'm like basically typing out the words they speak. But at the same time, it's like, well, how do you decide, like, which part of me is deciding which words they speak? Like, how do I mean, there is a weird sense in which you are like actively creating something through like constant deliberation. Right?
And taste.
Totally.
It's like what agrees.
Yeah, like what comes up that I would say like kind of in the moment, say like, yeah, let's go with that. And then, and what's going to stay on the page, right, after like looking back, that sucks, that's a terrible idea. But like, at least you have a starting point there, right? Like George Saunders' whole idea, where you just kind of comb through it. What does it like? Does this delight me? Does this delight me?
Just keep working the needle.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So you know, I don't have too much anxiety about like what I first go with. Oftentimes that intuition kind of works because, like you said, it's coming from, you know, it comes from some like sense of judgment I have at work, kind of half the back of my mind. But yeah, but still, it can still kind of surprise you, like in the sense that like their relationship kind of took me by surprise. But then I was like, of course, it makes perfect sense. Also, like it then unlocked for me like how, like by having Adrian be gay, like puts him in a more conflicted, like torqued relationship, right, to his whole society. He's deeply complicit, and yet he's also, you know, persecuted. His whole identity has to go to ground, which is kind of how his latent politics are part of it too. So just kind of all of a sudden things start coming together, yeah, how they come together, it's a mystery. It's ambiguous. Yeah.
What is next? What's the next generic restaurant?
Yeah, I'm working on a book. I'm in this for the long haul, you know. So it's weirdly like life's just better for me, like when I have written for the day. So that's gonna be a feature in my life. I'm working on another book. It's also set 1939, 1940, but mostly in San Francisco. A little bit looking back to Thailand. It's loosely based, kind of like this book is loosely based on Frank Ryan, historical character that I kind of used as a jumping off point. This one is loosely based on a kind of famous 20s, 30s travel writer adventurer, kind of a celebrity adventurer type. Who like
Pete, I feel like you have a type.
I do, weirdly. His name was Richard Halliburton, and he was like really famous in his day for going around the world, like following in great explorers' footsteps. And like, I'm gonna retrace Cortez's routes to Tenochtitlan. And of course, things would never work out, and it's, you know, the 1930s, and anyways, he disappeared while trying to sail a traditional Chinese jump across the Pacific in 1939. But did he?
You're gonna read a little bit more?
Yeah, okay, great. I'll give you a taste of Finn, and then take some questions. Okay, so this is just, I'm going to read you, since it's fairly short, the first little chapter of Finn McCool. His manuscript is called Finn McCool and the Bowels of Teutonia, concerning his murderous exploits in Berlin. A horse cart brimming with viscera clattered down the cobblestones of Horst Wesselstadt. Its fumes coiled up the saucer-sized nostrils of Finn McCool, filling his wise brain with the fragrance of slaughter. The scent was unmistakable, fouler than the spoiled rejectamenta sloshing in those sun-bleached barrels, fouler even than the fetid air of Friedrichshain, which reeked of dog shit and despair and industrial sewage gushing into the Spree. It was the scent of Morel, Dr. Theodor Morel, homeopathic healer and physician to the stars, the keeper of needles, the poisonous mushroom, the personal doctor of Adolf Hitler. Finn crawled along the quay, following the cargo of organ meat that had come from the far reaches of Slavdom. When the two guards became distracted by a girls' rowing team on the water, he slipped through the open loading dock and hid behind a metal staircase on the factory floor. Here was where they processed the offal, into the life-giving serum that flowed through Hitler's veins. Finn had come to spike the punch, though from what he could see and smell from his clankular perch, there was hardly a need for skullduggery. The ingredients themselves were pure poison, slimy sheep butters, putrefied bull pizzles, an ungodly stew of goat glands and equine vulvae that had traveled across the Ukrainian plains. These would surely kill any man, let alone a vegetarian like the Fuhrer. The truth was, Finn's heart did not warm to such a craven method of manslaying as the slip of a Mickey. Not after the incident with the treacherous Feeney. No, he much preferred monomachy, to feel the hilt of his blade up against the guts, hear the death groans, taste the blood spray. Of course, he stood no chance of getting in such close proximity to Hitler. Finn, as he crept from the staircase and up into the ventilation shaft, had a different plan. It was rumored that the Fuhrer had become dependent on his daily injections. He simply couldn't function without them. If the rumors were true, then one need not get to Hitler in order to knock him off his feet. All you had to do was eliminate the one man he relied upon to get through the day. Kill the doctor, and with a bit of luck, it just might kill the patient too. To think that a feckless, rot-livered Fenian could, with the simple flick of his stag knife, bring this war to a halt, the thought made Finn laugh so hard he nearly gave up his hiding spot. Fascists and doctors, Finn had come to understand, were kindred types, and the fascist doctor a lethal hybrid of the two. The fascist was known by his intolerance of ambiguity, overactive disgust reflex, and an adoration of authority. The second type, the medical doctor, was of much older issue but exhibited many similar traits. The desire to impose order by excising foreign bodies, the infliction of pain, and the need to reduce reality to convenient contraries like healthy versus sick. The expression of these personality traits, given the right context, could be destructive on its own, but when spliced with the fascists, the result was without exception monstrous. With Morel, Finn was circling his sixth kill. Seventh, if one counted that bit of bad business on the submarine, which he preferred not to do. The notches on his war club belonged to 4 Nazi doctors and 1 nurse, pedigreed party members. Hitler's doctor, and with any luck, Hitler himself, would be his crowning achievement. The problem was that Morel, despite being morbidly obese and uniquely malodorous, was an elusive figure. Finn had sighted him but once, stood face to face with the man in his office, in fact. But no sooner had he laid eyes on him than the doctor was spirited away to a fortress in the eastern forests. Now his office was shuttered, and his elite clientele of Reichskabinett members and film actresses was left out in the cold, clamoring for harder erections and softer stools. Like them, Finn faced the same intractable reality, that an appointment was simply out of the question. Doctors, they must be eliminated, thought Finn in his wise brain. That was why he was here in the hammer factory, slithering through the ductwork and scraping his horn against hot metal. He needed a new path to morality. He wormed onward until he reached the vent above the factory office. Stilling his breath, he inched his face to the grate. A man was working at the desk below him with his back to the vent. Finn could make out his balding crown and sloped shoulders hunched over an account book. He should be going to lunch soon, at which point Finn could root around the files. Surely one of those cabinets had a sheet with the doctor's home address on it. According to the rumors, the Fuhrer had bought him a villa somewhere in the western suburbs in return for curing his eczema. But the problem was there were several suburbs west of Berlin, many of them chock-a-block with villas. He'd asked his remaining friends among the Wilden, young misfits who roamed the lake shores of the Grunewald, to keep on the lookout for the portly doctor. But so far the little Indians had turned up only a gold-collared hound and the body of a drowned infant. 15 minutes passed, and the noon bell rang. Still, to Finn's surprise, the clerk remained at his desk. The Teutonians were usually so mechanized in their routine. Surely this man would not eat at his Arbeitsplatz. The practice was considered unhygienic here, belonging to the uncouth habits of New York financiers and Hollywood film moguls, a clear symptom of liberal Jewish decadence. The 1 o'clock return to work bell struck, yet the little office mole showed no signs of abating. Finn could hear him singing the sums to himself under his breath as he tallied. 41, 75, 223. Finn's limbs, perfectly roped muscle, began to cramp. The sweat gathered at the tip of his nose and pattered onto the metal. He tried to adjust himself, but in doing so snagged his nipple on a raised nail head and let out a groan. The clerk paused in his computations, lifted his head, and looked around for something to confirm the report of his ears. Finn remained frozen, exerting all the tendons in his neck to hold his face away from the grate. Seeing nothing, the man removed a cucumber, a jar of mustard, and a heel of black bread from his desk drawer, gave Finn his bald crown again, and returned to work. Having decided he must wait the clerk out, Finn withdrew his powers of central perception and retired into the privacy of his mind, as he had done so often during his years in the Spanish pit. He consulted his repertoire of tales, and feeling fatigue for all stories concerning his youth in Ireland, his criminal misadventures in New York, and his sobering political education in Spain, he decided to regale himself with the story of his ascension from the pit, chronicling his metamorphosis into the mighty hunter Finn. He would tell the tale of Finn McCool, secret, death-dealing ambidexter, scourge of Nazi doctors, and redeemer of Europe, currently stuck in the bowels of Berlin. I had one reviewer who said it's about an ambidextrous spy. I played it. Do you guys have any questions? Joshua.
Hello. So first off, great job, and I love the book. You have these. I guess I'm interested in sort of this concept of like author's voice in the characters, because you have these two really seemingly disparate, fleshed out, very complex characters. Is there one that you sort of identify more with? Like, was there one where it was like easier to write that character, and one where you felt like you had to sort of dig deeper to find what that character was? Or did they, because they're both coming from you, but they're very opposite. And are you consciously sort of accessing parts of you that's like, ooh, this is Adrian, this is Finn, talk about how that works.
Yeah, great. That to me was a lot of the fun is articulating the distinct voices and getting to, a lot of it I've come to realize, at least with me, is kind of like acting by yourself in a closet, right? Just like improvising, but improv almost always sucks. It's a great thing, don't get me wrong, I love it, I've done it, but it's mostly, unless you're really, really good, it's not something for public display. But it's fantastic, and it's so much fun to do, but with writing, you get to improvise on the page and then fix it and make it good, right? So there was a bit of doing that, of kind of trying out the voice, and I had kind of models. So for Adrian, like I said, Thomas Mann, and especially his novel Dr. Faustus, which has a similar kind of narrative structure in the sense it's the life of this composer, Adrian Leverkuhn, as told by a friend. So there was something of that tone there that fit for me, my Adrian. For Finn, right, it was fun to think okay, this is going to be in a kind of mock heroic mode. So I was drawing from Irish epic itself, things like the Toyne, where there's a lot of it's propelled kind of by alliteration. It's got kind of off the wall diction, and then I was also thinking about someone like Frank Pike, who's telling his own story in that mold. Thinking about Irish modernists there's a great novel by Flann O'Brien called At Swim Two Birds that I kind of stole this idea of Finn McCool is a minor character. He's a figure of Celtic myth, but one of the characters within the stories within stories in O'Brien's novel is this kind of mock heroic mode. Finn McCool's back was as broad as 6 handball courts, and his legs as big as hands or things like that. And so I was like, oh yeah, that kind of lit me up. As far as which of how much of myself is, and like you said, both it's all me behind the curtain there, and yet it's not me, neither of them are me. But I was able. I feel like it was easy in some ways to kind of put some of my contempt for modernity and just disgust with the world around me and elitist disdain. That comes out pretty easy. That goes in Adrian. Yeah. And with Frank Pike, it was more imaginative, but it was liberating. It was so not me, but it was if I were a man of action with a great gregarious voice and who always has a tale to tell and a joke to say. Yeah. So. Anything else?
All right.
Well, I got one.
Okay.
All right.
I could ask later, but you mentioned the phrase spy handler a lot. That is something that everyone knows, that there are spy handlers? Does every spy have a handler?
No, I mean, I think spies got to be handled, you know, until they're deployed. And then
That's why I usually only see them once the
you often see them deployed, yeah. So this is kind of like the waiting room. That's part of what drew me to it. It was like it's like a, you know, Frank. What Frank Pike gets up to as Finn is, you know, like very much, you know, kind of one-man insurgency. That's like the stuff of like he's a, you know, double agent. But as far as Adrian's concerned, yeah, he's a spy who never gets to be a spy. He's just like waiting to go to Ireland, and so he's really, yeah, at least in that manuscript, he's waiting to become a spy, just trying to stay out of trouble. And a lot of spies spend, I mean, I think most of the life of a spy, even when you're before you're deployed, is like just a lot of waiting. A lot of waiting and staying out of trouble. And I was drawn to that because it seemed like I liked the anti-dramatic nature of that, which then was a nice counterpoint to imagining what Finn's going to do. Yeah, gotta be handled.
For every great spy, you know, there's so many spies that didn't handle.
Call it a night?
Yeah.
All right. One more round of applause. So thank you all again for coming. Make sure to check out our calendar on our website for a lot more great events coming up in July and August. And buy the book, get it personalized, and feel free to stick around until 9 p.m.
Thank you.